The security camera footage didn't lie. At 9:47 p.m. on a cold November evening, outside Murphy's Corner store in Arlington, Virginia, 24-year-old Derek Castellano shoved 71-year-old Korean War veteran James Sullivan to the ground. The elderly man's groceries scattered across the wet pavement. His walking cane clattered into the gutter. "Get out of my way, old man." Derek's voice echoed through the parking lot as he climbed into his luxury sedan, leaving Mr. Sullivan bleeding from a head wound on the concrete. James Sullivan wasn't just any elderly citizen. He was a decorated veteran, a retired schoolteacher, and a beloved volunteer at the local VA hospital. For 40 years, he'd served his community with quiet dignity. He'd survived combat in Korea only to be assaulted in a parking lot by an entitled young man in a hurry. 3 witnesses immediately called 911. Mrs. Chen, who owned the adjacent laundry, rushed out with towels. "He just pushed him like he was nothing," she told police, her hands shaking. "Mr. Sullivan hit his head so hard. There was so much blood." The paramedics arrived within minutes. Mr. Sullivan had sustained a severe concussion, fractured ribs, and a gash requiring 17 stitches. At his age, the doctors warned, such injuries could have been fatal. By morning, the story had exploded across local news. By afternoon, it was national. The security footage played on loop, a young man in designer clothes casually assaulting an elderly veteran, then driving away without a backward glance. "Veteran attacked, elderly war hero hospitalized after assault," read the headlines. The community was livid. Veterans groups organized vigils. Social media erupted with outrage. Murphy's Corner store became a shrine of flowers and American flags left in Mr. Sullivan's honor. But what made this case extraordinary wasn't just the brutality. It was who Derek Castellano's father was. Michael Castellano, chief of the Arlington County Police Department. A man sworn to uphold the law. A man whose son had just broken it in the most callous way imaginable. The public demanded justice. No special treatment. No backroom deals. Real accountability. As Derek was formally charged with aggravated assault and leaving the scene of an injury, the arraignment was set for the following week. Judge Margaret Rivera, known for her no-nonsense approach and impeccable record, would preside. The community held its breath. Would this be justice, or another example of the powerful protecting their own? But an unexpected revelation was about to change everything in the courtroom. The Arlington County Courthouse hummed with tension on the morning of November 18th. Every seat in courtroom 4 was filled. Veterans in their service jackets sat shoulder to shoulder with concerned citizens. News cameras lined the back wall. Outside, protesters held signs, "No one is above the law," and "Justice for M.R. Sullivan." Judge Margaret Rivera entered at precisely 9 a.m. At 58, she carried herself with the calm authority of someone who'd spent 30 years navigating the complexities of the legal system. Her silver hair was pulled back neatly, her expression unreadable as she surveyed the packed courtroom. "All rise," the bailiff announced. The rustle of clothing and shuffling of feet filled the air. Judge Rivera took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and reviewed the documents before her. The People vs. Derek Castellano. Case number 2024, CR 8847. Charges: aggravated assault causing bodily injury and leaving the scene of an accident with injuries. Derek Castellano entered through the side door flanked by his attorney, Marcus Webb, one of the most expensive defense lawyers in Virginia. Derek wore a tailored navy suit and an expression that suggested he found these proceedings beneath him. His jaw was set, his posture relaxed, almost casual. He didn't look remorseful. He looked annoyed. As he took his seat at the defense table, he glanced around the courtroom with barely concealed disdain. When his eyes briefly met those of James Sullivan, sitting in the front row with a bandage still visible above his eyebrow, Derek looked away dismissively. Judge Rivera noticed. She noticed everything. "Mr. Castellano," she began, her voice measured. "You understand the charges against you?" Derek leaned toward his attorney, who whispered something. Then Derek straightened and spoke directly to the judge, his tone flat. "Yes, Your Honor, though I think they're greatly exaggerated." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Judge Rivera's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. "Exaggerated," she repeated slowly. "Mr. Castellano, an elderly veteran, was hospitalized with serious injuries. There is video evidence. There are multiple witnesses. What, precisely, is exaggerated?" Derek shifted in his seat. "Your Honor, it was an accident. He was blocking my way. I barely touched him. If he was too fragile to handle a little push, that's not really my fault, is it?" The courtroom erupted. Veterans stood, shouting. The bailiff called for order. Judge Rivera's gavel came down hard. Once, twice, 3 times. "Silence!" Her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "I will have order in this courtroom, or I will clear it. Is that understood?" The room settled into angry silence. Judge Rivera turned her full attention to Derek. "Mr. Castellano, let me be crystal clear. You are not in your father's office. You are in my courtroom. Here, there are no shortcuts, no special favors, and no excuses. You will address this court with respect, and you will take these proceedings seriously." Derek's jaw tightened. For a moment, something like defiance flashed in his eyes. Then he muttered, "My father." "Your father is irrelevant here," Judge Rivera interrupted sharply. "The only thing that matters is what you did and what the law requires." Derek's attorney placed a warning hand on his client's arm, but Derek shook it off. "You don't understand. My father will." "Will what?" Judge Rivera's voice was ice. Derek leaned back, a slight smirk playing at his lips. "My father will fix this." The courtroom went utterly still. Judge Rivera slowly removed her glasses and set them on her desk. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the room. "Mr. Castellano, I strongly suggest you reconsider your attitude before you find yourself in significantly more trouble than you're already in." Before Derek could respond, the prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Linda Morales, stood. "Your Honor, the people would like to call James Sullivan to give his victim impact statement." Mr. Sullivan rose with difficulty, leaning heavily on his cane. The courtroom watched in respectful silence as he made his way to the witness stand. The bailiff helped him up the step. Once seated, Mr. Sullivan looked not at Derek, but directly at Judge Rivera. His voice, when he spoke, was steady despite his age. "Your Honor, I'm 71 years old. I served my country in Korea. I taught 5th grade for 33 years. I've buried my wife, raised 2 children, and volunteered at the VA hospital every Wednesday for the last decade." He paused, his hands trembling slightly on the armrests. "In all those years, through war and peace, through good times and bad, I've tried to treat every person I met with basic human dignity." He finally turned to look at Derek. "That night, I was just trying to get to my car with my groceries. I said, 'Excuse me,' when I accidentally got in this young man's way. He called me an old man, and pushed me so hard I didn't even have time to break my fall. I hit my head on the concrete. I couldn't see for the blood in my eyes. I couldn't get up." His voice cracked slightly. "I thought I might die in that parking lot. I thought I'd survived a war only to die alone in the dark because someone couldn't be bothered to show me basic respect." Several people in the gallery were crying now. Even some of the court staff had tears in their eyes. "I don't want vengeance," Mr. Sullivan continued. "But I do want this young man to understand that actions have consequences. That people matter. That respect isn't something you give only to those who can do something for you. It's something you give to everyone, simply because they're human." He looked back at Judge Rivera. "That's all, Your Honor." "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan," Judge Rivera said quietly. "You may step down." As the elderly veteran carefully made his way back to his seat, Judge Rivera turned to Derek. The young man's face had gone pale, but his expression remained stubborn. "Mr. Castellano, do you have anything to say to Mr. Sullivan?" Derek opened his mouth, looked at his attorney, then back at the judge. I didn't mean for him to get hurt that badly." "That's not an apology," Judge Rivera observed. "I'm not." Derek stopped himself, then continued more carefully. "Look, I was in a hurry. It was an accident. I'm sorry he's old and fragile, but what?" Judge Rivera's patience was visibly thinning. Derek's arrogance finally broke through completely. "But my father is Chief Castellano. He's important in this community. This is going to ruin my life over one mistake. It's not fair. My father will fix this. He has to." Judge Rivera opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, a voice from the back of the courtroom rang out, deep and broken. "No, Derek, I won't." Every head turned, and then someone stood up in the back of the courtroom. Chief Michael Castellano had been sitting in the last row, partially obscured by a pillar, wearing civilian clothes. He'd arrived before the courtroom opened, hoping to go unnoticed, but he could no longer remain silent. Now he stood, a tall man in his early 50s with graying hair and the bearing of someone who'd spent a lifetime in uniform. His face was etched with pain and shame. "Chief Castellano," Judge Rivera said, surprise evident in her voice for the first time that morning. "I wasn't aware you were present. I asked to be here, Your Honor." His voice was steady but thick with emotion. "I needed to hear what my son did, what he became." Derek twisted in his seat, his face a mixture of relief and expectation. "Dad, tell them this is ridiculous. Tell them." "Be quiet, Derek." The chief's words were soft but carried unmistakable authority. Derek fell silent, confused. Judge Rivera studied the chief for a long moment, then said, "Would you like to address the court, Chief Castellano?" "If I may, Your Honor." "Approach." Michael Castellano walked down the center aisle. With each step, his face seemed to age. He passed Mr. Sullivan, pausing briefly. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm so deeply sorry." His voice broke. "There are no words." Mr. Sullivan nodded slowly but said nothing. The chief continued to the front of the courtroom and stood before the judge. He didn't look at his son. "Your Honor, members of the court, and most importantly, Mr. Sullivan." He took a deep breath. "I've been a police officer for 29 years. Chief for the last 7. I took an oath to uphold the law without prejudice or favor, to serve and protect every citizen equally." He finally turned to look at Derek, and tears welled in his eyes. "I have one son. I love him more than my own life. But somewhere along the way, I failed him. I protected him from consequences when I should have taught him accountability. I gave him privilege when I should have taught him humility. I made him believe that his last name would shield him from the results of his actions." Derek's face had gone from confused to panicked. "Dad, what are you?" "I said be quiet." The chief's voice thundered through the courtroom, startling everyone. Then, more quietly, tears now streaming down his face, "For once in your life, Derek, just listen." He turned back to Judge Rivera. "Your Honor, I came here today because I knew my son would invoke my name. He'd expect me to use my position to protect him. And God help me, part of me wanted to. Because he's my son, and I love him." He wiped his eyes roughly with the back of his hand. "But Mr. Sullivan is someone's father, too. He's someone who served this country with honor. He's someone who has given his whole life to his community. And my son treated him like he was garbage. Like he was nothing. The chief's voice hardened with resolve. Your Honor, I am formally requesting that you show my son no leniency based on who I am or what position I hold. In fact, I'm asking you to hold him to a higher standard. As the son of a law enforcement officer, he should know better than anyone that actions have consequences. Derek shot to his feet. Dad, no. You can't. Sit down, Mr. Castellano, Judge Rivera ordered. But he's my father. He's supposed to. I said sit down. Judge Rivera's voice cracked like a whip. Derek collapsed into his chair, his face white, his hands shaking. The chief continued, his voice thick with emotion but unwavering in conviction. I've spent my entire career trying to build trust between law enforcement and this community, trying to show that justice applies equally to everyone. If I protect my son now, I destroy everything I've worked for. I betray every oath I've ever taken. I betray Mr. Sullivan and everyone like him. He looked directly at his son for the first time. Derek, I love you. I will always love you. But I will not save you from the consequences of your choices. That would be the worst thing I could do to you, and to every person who trusts that the law means something. Derek's face crumpled. For the first time, the arrogance was completely gone, replaced by raw fear and disbelief. Dad, please. Your Honor, the chief said, his voice breaking completely now, please do what the law requires. Show my son what justice looks like. It's the only way he'll ever become the man I hoped he'd be. The chief stepped back, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of what he'd just done had physically pressed down on him. He made his way to an empty seat in the front row, his face in his hands. The courtroom was absolutely silent except for the sound of muffled crying. From the chief, from Derek, from members of the gallery who understood they just witnessed something profound. Judge Rivera sat motionless for several long moments, her expression unreadable. Then she looked at Derek, who was now openly weeping, his head bowed. Mr. Castellano, she said quietly, do you understand what your father just did? Derek couldn't speak. He could only nod, tears streaming down his face. Your father, Judge Rivera continued, just showed you what real strength looks like, what real love looks like. He chose principle over comfort. He chose what was right over what was easy. He chose to be the father you needed, not the one you wanted. She paused, letting her words settle over the shattered young man before her. This court will take a 30-minute recess. When we return, I will deliver my sentence. The gavel fell. 30 minutes later, Judge Rivera returned to a courtroom that felt fundamentally different than it had that morning. The anger had given way to something more complex, a mixture of sorrow, hope, and anticipation. Derek Castellano sat hunched at the defense table, his expensive suit rumpled, his face red and swollen from crying. His attorney sat beside him, hand on his shoulder, no longer just a legal representative but a human presence in a devastating moment. Chief Castellano remained in the front row, staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched. Mr. Sullivan sat with quiet dignity, his hands folded over the head of his cane. All rise. Judge Rivera took her seat and surveyed the courtroom. When she spoke, her voice carried both the weight of authority and the compassion of someone who understood the gravity of what she was about to do. Mr. Castellano, please rise. Derek stood shakily, his attorney rising beside him. Derek Castellano, you have been convicted of aggravated assault causing bodily injury to an elderly person and leaving the scene of an accident with injuries. These are serious crimes that deserve serious consequences. She paused, looking directly at him. But I've also witnessed something unusual today. I've watched your father sacrifice his own comfort, his own relationship with you, in service of a greater principle. I've watched you begin, and I stress begin, to understand the magnitude of what you've done. Derek's hands were shaking. He gripped the edge of the table. Justice requires accountability, Judge Rivera continued. It also requires, when appropriate, the possibility of redemption. So here is my sentence. The courtroom held its collective breath. You are hereby sentenced to 18 months in the county detention facility. Derek's knees nearly buckled. With all but 90 days suspended, provided you successfully complete the following conditions. She looked down at her notes. You will serve 90 days in custody, with no early release. Following your release, you will complete 500 hours of community service, specifically at the Arlington Veterans Hospital, where you will assist elderly veterans with their daily needs. You will attend mandatory counseling sessions twice weekly for 1 year, focusing on empathy development and anger management. She looked up at him. Additionally, you will write a formal letter of apology to Mr. Sullivan, not a legal document crafted by your attorney, but your own words, expressing genuine remorse and understanding. You will read that letter aloud in this courtroom. Derek was crying openly now, but nodding. Finally, Judge Rivera said, her voice softening slightly, you will, upon completion of these requirements, deliver a presentation at 3 local high schools about accountability, consequences, and respect. You will tell students what you did, what it cost you, and what you learned. She set down her papers. If you fail to complete any of these requirements, you will serve the full 18-month sentence. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Derek managed to say through his tears. Thank you. Thank you. Before Judge Rivera could continue, Chief Castellano stood. Your Honor, if I may add something? Judge Rivera nodded. The chief stepped forward, his face composed now, though his eyes were still red. Derek, in addition to the court sentence, I'm adding my own consequences. You will move out of my house. You will get a job and support yourself. I will pay for your counseling, but nothing else. No lawyer fees, no bail, no rent, no car payments. Nothing. Derek turned to look at his father, devastated. You need to learn what the rest of the world already knows, the chief said, his voice firm but not unkind. That you have to earn respect. That you have to build character. That privilege is not a right, it's a responsibility. He paused, and for just a moment his voice softened. But when you've completed your sentence, when you've done the work, when you've changed, I'll be here. Because that's what fathers do. They hold their sons accountable, and they wait for them to become the men they're capable of being. The chief sat back down. Judge Rivera turned to Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, would you like to say anything? The elderly veteran stood slowly and turned to face Derek. For a long moment, he just looked at the young man who had hurt him so badly. Young man, he said finally, his voice gentle, what you did to me was wrong. It was cruel. It hurt me physically in ways I'm still recovering from, and it hurt me in my heart because I couldn't understand how someone could treat another human being that way. Derek bowed his head, fresh tears falling. But I'm going to tell you something important, Mr. Sullivan continued. I forgive you. Derek's head snapped up, his eyes wide. Not because you deserve it right now, Mr. Sullivan said firmly, but because I've seen what unforgiveness does to a man's soul. I've carried hatred before, and it nearly destroyed me. I won't carry it any more. He stepped closer to Derek. But forgiveness doesn't mean there are no consequences. You have a hard road ahead of you. You're going to struggle. You're going to want to quit. Don't. Do the work. Change. Become better. He glanced at Chief Castellano. You have a father who loves you enough to let you fall so you can learn to stand on your own. That's a precious gift. Don't waste it. Mr. Sullivan turned back to Judge Rivera. Your Honor, I'm satisfied with this sentence. Thank you for your wisdom. As he returned to his seat, Judge Rivera addressed the courtroom one final time. Let this case be a reminder to everyone here. Justice is not about vengeance. It's about accountability, consequence, and the possibility of change. It's about recognizing that every person has inherent dignity and deserves respect. She looked at Derek. You have been given a rare gift today, Mr. Castellano. Your victim has offered forgiveness. Your father has offered tough love. This court has offered you a path to redemption. Whether you take it is entirely up to you. Her gavel fell one last time. This court is adjourned. Epilogue. 6 months later. The Arlington Veterans Hospital bustled with activity on a bright May afternoon. In the rehabilitation wing, a young man in simple khakis and a hospital volunteer shirt carefully guided a wheelchair down the corridor. Derek Castellano had changed. Not dramatically. He wasn't a different person. But the arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced by something quieter, more humble. His eyes, once cold with entitlement, now held awareness. "Mr. Patterson, your physical therapy session is in 5 minutes," Derek said gently to the elderly man in the wheelchair. "Would you like me to take you, or would you prefer to wheel yourself?" "I'll wheel myself, young man," the 80-year-old Vietnam veteran replied with a grin. "But you can walk with me. Tell me more about that criminology class you're taking." As they moved down the hallway, another veteran, James Sullivan, emerged from a room, leaning less heavily on his cane than he had 6 months ago. "Mr. Sullivan," Derek said, stopping immediately. Even now, facing the man he'd hurt produced a complicated mixture of shame and gratitude. "Derek," Mr. Sullivan acknowledged with a nod. "How are you?" I'm doing the work, sir," Derek replied quietly. "Every day. I can see that." Mr. Sullivan's expression was kind but appraising. "The staff tells me you're one of their most dedicated volunteers." Derek looked down. "I owe that much. And more." "Yes," Mr. Sullivan agreed simply. "You do. But you're paying it. That counts for something." He placed a weathered hand on Derek's shoulder briefly, then continued down the hall. Derek watched him go, then turned back to Mr. Patterson. "Ready, sir." "Son," the old veteran said thoughtfully, "I don't know what you did before you came here, but I know men. I know when they're faking it and when they're genuine. You're doing something right." Derek swallowed hard. "I'm trying, Mr. Patterson. I'm really trying." That evening, Derek sat in his small studio apartment, the one he rented with money from his job as a warehouse loader, and worked on his presentation for Wakefield High School. His laptop screen showed a title slide, "When Privilege Meets Consequence, My Story." On his desk sat 2 photographs. One was of his father in his police chief uniform, stern but proud. They'd had dinner together last week for the first time in months, a quiet, sometimes awkward meal, but a beginning. The other photograph was of Mr. Sullivan shaking Derek's hand at the hospital, taken by a staff member who wanted to document what healing looked like. Derek looked at both photos for a long moment, then returned to his presentation. He had 70 more hours of community service to complete, 3 more schools to speak at, 6 more months of counseling. But for the first time in his life, Derek Castellano understood something fundamental. Real strength wasn't about who your father was or what privileges you held. Real strength was about owning your mistakes, doing the hard work of change, and treating every person, regardless of age, status, or position, with the dignity they deserved. Outside his window, the sun set over Arlington, casting long shadows that gradually gave way to evening light. And in that light, a young man who had once believed himself above the law sat working on a message about accountability, redemption, and the transformative power of justice tempered with mercy. His father had been right. This was the only way Derek could become the man he was meant to be. And finally, painfully, hopefully, he was beginning to understand what that meant. Epilogue. 6 months later. The Arlington Veterans Hospital bustled with activity on a bright May afternoon. In the rehabilitation wing, A young man in simple khakis and a hospital volunteer shirt carefully guided a wheelchair down the corridor. Derek Castellano had changed. Not dramatically. He wasn't a different person. But the arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced by something quieter, more humble. His eyes, once cold with entitlement, now held awareness. "Mr. Patterson, your physical therapy session is in 5 minutes," Derek said gently to the elderly man in the wheelchair. "Would you like me to take you, or would you prefer to wheel yourself?" "I'll wheel myself, young man," the 80-year-old Vietnam veteran replied with a grin. "But you can walk with me. Tell me more about that criminology class you're taking." As they moved down the hallway, another veteran, James Sullivan, emerged from a room, leaning less heavily on his cane than he had 6 months ago. "Mr. Sullivan," Derek said, stopping immediately. Even now, facing the man he'd hurt produced a complicated mixture of shame and gratitude. "Derek," Mr. Sullivan acknowledged with a nod. "How are you?" I'm doing the work, sir," Derek replied quietly. "Every day. I can see that." Mr. Sullivan's expression was kind but appraising. "The staff tells me you're one of their most dedicated volunteers." Derek looked down. "I owe that much. And more." "Yes," Mr. Sullivan agreed simply. "You do. But you're paying it. That counts for something." He placed a weathered hand on Derek's shoulder briefly, then continued down the hall. Derek watched him go, then turned back to Mr. Patterson. "Ready, sir." "Son," the old veteran said thoughtfully, "I don't know what you did before you came here, but I know men. I know when they're faking it and when they're genuine. You're doing something right." Derek swallowed hard. "I'm trying, Mr. Patterson. I'm really trying." That evening, Derek sat in his small studio apartment, the one he rented with money from his job as a warehouse loader, and worked on his presentation for Wakefield High School. His laptop screen showed a title slide, "When Privilege Meets Consequence, My Story." On his desk sat 2 photographs. One was of his father in his police chief uniform, stern but proud. They'd had dinner together last week for the first time in months, a quiet, sometimes awkward meal, but a beginning. The other photograph was of Mr. Sullivan shaking Derek's hand at the hospital, taken by a staff member who wanted to document what healing looked like. Derek looked at both photos for a long moment, then returned to his presentation. He had 70 more hours of community service to complete, 3 more schools to speak at, 6 more months of counseling. But for the first time in his life, Derek Castellano understood something fundamental. Real strength wasn't about who your father was or what privileges you held. Real strength was about owning your mistakes, doing the hard work of change, and treating every person, regardless of age, status, or position, with the dignity they deserved. Outside his window, the sun set over Arlington, casting long shadows that gradually gave way to evening light. And in that light, a young man who had once believed himself above the law sat working on a message about accountability, redemption, and the transformative power of justice tempered with mercy. His father had been right. This was the only way Derek could become the man he was meant to be. And finally, painfully, hopefully, he was beginning to understand what that meant.